Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Pilot Principle, which is the podcast where we take a look at just the first episode, the pilot, and use it to decide if we should be watching the entire series, or at least the second episode, because we're not savages here, people. But we do have so little time, and there is just so much to bloody watch. First to say is that I'm not about to start bringing out the balloons or the streamers or the cake, though there is never a bad reason to have cake. But I realised that this is the 30th episode of The Pilot Principle, so woohoo! Celebrations all around. So if you have stuck with me for every single episode, or if you are just joining me today for your first, hello, welcome, I'm Jen. Thank you very much, and here is to another 30 episodes. Okay, with that being said, and a little bit celebrated, let's get into talking about the pilot episode of Prime Video's Mr. and Mrs. Smith. If you don't know the deal here, then when analysing a pilot episode, I like to look at the story, the characters, the protagonists and the antagonists, the pace, the arc, where I love to wildly speculate on where I think the series may go, and then talk about the end of episode hook before letting you know if I think the pilot episode has done its job in convincing us to watch the entire series, and why. Now that we are all on the same page, let us get into talking about the synopsis for the pilot episode of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I do normally use the network's pilot synopsis, but the one on Prime Video was, there's no polite way to say this, so I'm just going to say what it was, and that is awful. It was just terrible. I will share it with you towards the end of the episode, but let's just say Chat GPT, anyone? So this is the synopsis as provided by moi. John and Jane have never met, but they go from strangers to newlyweds overnight. We watch as they simultaneously navigate their new relationship and their first mission. Thank you. Hold the applause. She's a writer, everybody. Thank you. I'll be taking requests. Okay, now that we talked about the synopsis, let us move into the credits. And you know what? Actually, this week, I can say that the credits probably won't last as long as they normally do, but that's probably because we have less people to talk about. But I will still try to make this as succinct as possible, and let's face it, I'll make the same promise every week, and every week I will fail. But on this episode, we have a pilot title. Yay! Round of applause. The pilot title for Mr. and Mrs. Smith is First Date, and I think it's a brilliant title. To be honest, it really encompasses what the episode is and brings, and that will become evident as we chat more about the episode itself later on. We have an episode length of 59 minutes according to Prime Video, but if you actually watch the episode, it actually ends up being more around the 52-minute mark, which is my speed. And finally, we have a series length of 8 episodes. So that's a good healthy amount, I think. So far, no complaints. Pilot title, check. Decent episode length, check. Decent series length, double check. The pilot First Date was written by Francesca Sloane and Donald Glover, and both Sloane and Glover are credited as creating the series and executive producing it too. We will leave talking about Donald Glover till later, so for now we'll focus on Francesca Sloane. And Sloane has written episodes of 7 Seconds, The First, Fargo, and Atlanta. The director for First Date was Hiro Murai, who is also an executive producer. And Murai has directed episodes of Atlanta, Station 11, Barry, Snowfall, and Legion. Looking through his IMDb page, it looks like he started off as a music video director, and he has directed a lot of Childish Gambino's music videos, which includes This Is America. Moving on to cast, and we will first discuss Donald Glover, who plays Mr. John Smith. Now, Donald Glover, as a writer, has written episodes of the TV comedy series 30 Rock, the series Atlanta, which he also created, as well as the 2023 series Swarm, which he also created. As an actor, Glover has starred in the movies Solo: A Star Wars Story, Spider-Man: Homecoming, The Martian, and Magic Mike XXL. For television, he starred in the series Atlanta, Community, and 30 Rock. As a voice actor, he's also voiced characters in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, The Lion King, and Adventure Time, Fiona and Cake. And finally, to note on Glover is that he will be starring in the upcoming Star Wars franchise movie Lando and in Community the movie, which we've recently heard that the script is now complete. And last but by no means least on the cast list, we have Maya Erskine, who plays Mrs. Jane Smith. Now, Erskine voiced Mizu in Blue Eye Samurai and was in Obi-Wan Kenobi, the miniseries. She also had a voice role on Bob's Burgers and starred in Casual and Insecure. And to some or most, she might be known for Pen 15, which she starred in, wrote, executive produced, and created. If I haven't said this before, then Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the series, is out on Prime Video. And for those who don't know, Mr. and Mrs. Smith is actually based on the 2005 movie of the same name, starring Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. I believe for those who have a Disney Plus subscription, you can go and watch the movie if you want to watch it before watching the series. Now, in terms of what made me want to watch the series Mr. and Mrs. Smith, to be honest, this one was just based on popular intrigue. I mean, it's been a few years, but I have seen the movie of which the idea is based a few times, and I liked it. I liked the concept and was interested in seeing how they were going to realize it for the small screen. Also, Donald Glover was a big pull. I actually haven't seen him in anything other than Community, which I know is a travesty, okay? Atlanta was on the never-ending list for a while. In fact, it's probably still on the list there, and I completely forgot about it. But I've heard good things. I heard he can act. I heard he's a half-decent writer. I've actually never listened to any of his music except for This Is America. So, no crazy reasons. I'm just a regular person living in a regular world who wanted to watch something that everybody else was watching. Right, let us get into the first 10 minutes of First Date, the pilot episode of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Why the first 10 minutes, you wonder? Well, the first 10 minutes are where you need to grip your watcher so that they do not switch off. I mean, it's no use having all the best bits in the last 10 minutes of a series or film if no one sticks around long enough to see it, you know? And by the end of those first 10 minutes, it typically takes us to the point of the inciting incident or the end of Act 1. So it just feels like a nice little ecosystem capsulated piece of television. So yeah, those first 10 minutes should grip us. So let's see what the first 10 minutes of First Date is looking like. A man and a woman are sat out on their front porch enjoying a drink. It's all very peaceful, it's very zen, it's very chill. That is until they hear the sound of a device beeping and see a car racing down the long road towards their sanctuary. And then the seemingly peaceful couple are in go-mode. They are throwing duffel bags to one another, grabbing money and weapons that are hidden around the house, until the woman stops and says she can't keep running, and so the two of them decide to fight. They have guns at the ready, but before they can deploy any tactical maneuvers, the man is shot dead. The woman doesn't get too far either before she too is taken down with a bullet. We fade away from the death of the couple into a woman being called for an interview. When she sits down in a room, she is sat opposite a computer where words are displayed on the screen, and there is a camera that watches her and presumably sound that is picking up what she's saying. From the moment the computer asks her to provide her pre-cut nail clippings, we can tell that this isn't going to be a normal kind of interview. The computer goes on to ask her various things about herself, including her height, her heritage, and if she is willing to relocate. We get the same interview process from the point of view of a man who answers the exact same questions. While this man and woman are separately going back and forth with the computer, we watch as first the woman enters this lovely house and begins looking around, and later on see the man enter the same house and begin to look around too. And then these two people are suddenly face to face in the in-house elevator and introduce themselves as Jane and John. Then, quite beautifully, we have the title card come up, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and that is the 10-minute mark. Man, I love when it perfectly aligns itself like that. It's almost like I know what I'm talking about. But just to tie things up, after the title card, we watch as Jane finds a gift that has been left for her and John, and it's a nice bottle of some sort of alcohol, but that's not important. What is important is the card that is with it, and on the inside it says, "Congratulations on your first day of marriage." And I have to say, as an intro, I thought that was really, really enjoyable. The interview process was a really good way to learn about these two strangers. And it's kind of cool too, because we know before they do what they have in common and what they don't have in common, what could end up being a problem in their relationship and where we think their relationship could thrive. The way they match John and Jane talking to the computer almost feels like a dating service. And in a way, I suppose it is, because it does find a way to marry the two people together. You see what I did there? And we actually learn in the pilot episode that the two of them are legally married too, which is wild to me. But I guess stranger things are afoot in this world of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I will also say from the intro that, weirdly enough, I'm not super curious about the spy agency that they must be working with or that recruited them. And I don't know, maybe it's because they don't give us a face or a name to attach to or associate with them that I almost completely forget that, they're not doing all of this stuff for shits and gigs. And the last thing that I want to say about the intro is that the first couple that we meet, the guy is actually played by Alexander Skarsgård and the woman is played by Eliza Gonzalez, and they do actually refer to themselves as John and Jane. Now, I don't know if it's just me, but it's giving Brangelina. It's giving Brad Pitt's rendition of Mr. Smith and Angelina's rendition of Mrs. Smith. Am I reading too much into this? Was it a symbolic way of killing off the movie and saying we're starting fresh with the series? Or will it actually feed into the plot? Because we actually don't see or hear of that couple again for the rest of the pilot episode. So, yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Drop me a comment on your opinion of this Brangelina-ish looking couple at the beginning of the pilot. But this isn't 2005, this is 2024, so let us focus on our John and Jane. And let's start with Jane Smith. And here's what we know, and this is based on Jane's own words. So she says that she has antisocial tendencies. She has a master's from the CIA, which I didn't know that you could get, but she didn't make the cut with the CIA. She also tells us that she is secretive and that she has been described as numb and manipulative. So that's to give us a general sense of her character as told by herself and told by others to her face. Ooh, imagine being called numb and manipulative to your face. Rah, that's deep. From what we see of Jane throughout the pilot episode, it seems like a lot of these things may or may not be true. She does hold her cards very close to her chest. John is constantly peppering her with questions about who she is before she joined the agency and, her thoughts and opinions and things. And she just remains a closed book. She also makes it clear that she's not here for the romance. She's just here for work. And that's some hardcore work. Like, this work is your life. You weren't born with the name Jane. Like, that's work 24/7, which is crazy. But we do get the sense that she seems quite good at reading people and situations. And I think perhaps over the course of the series, this sort of hard locked down Jane may open up a little bit to her newlywed husband, John. Speaking of John, here's what we know about him from his own words. He has a military background. He is confident in hand-to-hand combat. He knows how to use drones. And there is a mention of him being dishonorably discharged, though he does contest the term dishonorable, but seems apathetic to it too. He describes himself as competitive, and he says he has been described as emotionally unintelligent, which, like... Do they have a mutual friend here who just likes to throw shade in people's face? Anyway, I do think that being told that he has been dishonorably discharged tells us that he might not necessarily always follow the rules if he doesn't think that the rules are right. We do get a sense of this from the way he probes Jane for information about her life, because we don't know the rules of their current situationship, but it almost feels like they're not supposed to know who each other were before they became Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But he's out here like poking, just trying to get something, anything out of her, and almost form some sort of a relationship, not necessarily a romantic relationship, but at least a relationship based on friendship between the two of them, because they are the only two going through what they're going through, and they actually don't have anybody else to talk about it with. I do think over the course of the series, maybe Jane might have a bit of an influence on him and teach him he needs to learn to shut up and follow the rules where necessary. I don't know. I'm out here just doing wild speculations based on the information I've been given. Now, in terms of John and Jane together and their character dynamics, we do learn that they both love pasta and Korean barbecue. So hopefully there's a chance for them to discover that, because we know that, but they don't know that they know that. But they don't know that about each other. Yeah, that's right. They don't know that about each other, but we know that. So I'm hoping that there'll be a cute little scene at some point of them eating Korean barbecue or pasta. There is a lovely sort of movement between the two of them. They almost feel like they're circling each other like sharks, trying to work out who is the prey and who is the predator. You know, work out little bits of information about each other, because even though Jane doesn't necessarily want to open up, she's also out here prodding John a little bit when he prods her too hard. It is this weird, clumsy, awkward situation between the two. They've literally just met, but it's funny and it's fun, and I can't quite work out if they are supposed to be compatible or not, which I also think works really well. Like, they don't look like they fit, and that makes sense. They've only just met and they have been paired together. They haven't chosen each other. I don't know, it's kind of weird, but it's good. And you can also see that they keep a subconscious space between one another, because they've literally known each other, I can't stress this enough, for 24 hours, maybe 48 max. And I don't know if this is me being a conspiracy theorist, but if the initial John and Jane from the very beginning of the episode wasn't supposed to be a sort of like, you know, killing the old Mr. and Mrs. Smith to make way for the new Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and they do actually factor into the storyline, I wonder if maybe those two characters fell in love and that wasn't allowed. So perhaps there's a reason that this new John and Jane don't look like they're compatible, because the agency or computer system or whatever who put them together tried to make sure that what happened with the initial John and Jane doesn't happen again. I'm out here throwing theories. Feel free to catch them. Now, the last thing to say about the characters is that, what kind of people were they? What kind of people were they? What kind of people give up everything at the drop of a hat? They have to give up their former names, their former lives. They can never talk to their parents again or anyone that they used to know. What makes you leave all of that behind? There is a joke somewhere in the middle about how nobody else would take them as the only job that they could get. Ha ha ha. But like, why did you need this job specifically? That being said, I don't know. That house was sweet. I might have taken the job too. Typically, after we talk about the protagonists, we move on to talking about the antagonists. But in First Date, there is none to speak of. You know, we don't have the patriarchy, we don't have the government, we don't have the weather, we don't have even themselves. There's not even a whiff of any serial big bad in the pilot episode, which I think is a smart choice, as it possibly could have changed the easy and explorative dynamic of John and Jane. If you like, I could be the antagonist. But for now, that's all there is to say on characters. Join me as we take a quick interlude to see what TV and film life is looking like beyond the pilot principle. And there actually isn't too much to say on this episode, because it's only been 48 hours between me recording this episode and the last one I did on BBC Three's new supernatural drama series Domino Day. So I have more to say on what I've been reading and watching and stuff in that episode, but I'll just give you a quick overview anyway. As always, starting first with books, I still have not finished listening to Pierce Brown's Morning Star, but I'm getting there. I think I'm at like 80% now, so hopefully by the weekend I'll have finished it. But I have picked up Pride and Prejudice to reread, and can I just say, I'm having an absolute hoot. It is so funny. I don't know how many times I've read Pride and Prejudice, but it's been a couple of years since my last reread, and I forgot how funny it was. I'm literally cackling. Let's just say that Mr. Bennet might now be my new favourite character in the book. There is nothing new in the land of TV for me, unfortunately, except literally Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So we're on this journey together, kids. I can say that between my Domino Day episode and this episode on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I did go and see the new Matthew Vaughn movie Argylle. And, I can say that it was, oh God, what word to use? It was fun. It did have some twists that I didn't see coming. And it was also all of a sudden absolutely ridiculous, for a lack of better terminology to describe it. I will say good for Samuel L. Jackson, who just showed up and got paid. It did get a bit meta at the end and felt like it was trying to show a connection between the Argylle world and the Kingsman world, but I didn't really get it. So if you understood it, then please drop me a comment under the trailer for this episode on Instagram, Threads, and Twitter/X at Pilot Principle, where we can chat about the latest in film and TV and books. In terms of what I really enjoyed about the pilot episode of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, First Date, I liked that John and Jane continue to periodically talk to their interview machine, for lack of a better word for it, throughout the episode, because I think it works really well in giving us a continued insight into what they were keeping from one another and a little bit of their psyche. Of course, they're on their best behavior because it was technically an interview, but it was also the last chance, or the only chance that we had, of seeing who they are when nobody else was watching. It was also the last chance that they had at being themselves. And so as it cut between the interview scenes and the scenes where they were together, you could sort of see the subtle shift in that juxtaposed reflections, and it worked really, really well. On the flippity flip side, in terms of what I didn't like, there was a strange flip of characteristics towards the end of the pilot episode. So from what we know in the pilot episode, John is the one who is constantly asking Jane questions, who is questioning why they are there, who the organization is, what their current mission is, because they spend the entire episode following this woman and they're told to intercept a package that she receives and then deliver it to an address. That's all they know. So they spend the whole day kind of on a first date, getting to know each other and going through the city. And as I said, John is just asking her questions and Jane is just deflection, deflection, deflection. And then towards the end of the episode, when they actually get the box from the target, Jane is the one who wants to know more. She's asking John, what do you think is in the box? At one point, she almost looks like she's trying to get inside the box. And John is the one who is telling her to forget about it, that it doesn't matter, that it's not part of the mission for them to know what's in the box. What's in the box? Oh, that's a nice little extra Brad Pitt silk around, isn't it? Anyway, I will say that this sort of flip in their personalities did throw me off a bit, especially because they'd built up and instilled specific characteristics in John and Jane for the past 30 minutes, which is that John is the curious one and Jane is the one who is just doing the job. So that's the only thing that felt off for me throughout the pilot episode. Now, before we get to that all-important question, I promised you a reading of the synopsis that is on Prime Video, didn't I? Okay, let's get into it. So this is very long, so bear with me. Meet the Smiths, John and Jane, ! Strangers who have given up their identities to be paired off by a secretive organisation, both in espionage and in marriage. Two peas stuck in a pod come along as they run, jump and adventure, making friends and making memories. But watch out, there's something amiss for this very first mission. It's John and Jane's first date! Good luck, John and Jane! What? There is no way that this wasn't written by artificial intelligence. You can't convince me otherwise. What? First of all, this does just give too much away, which is why I didn't read it out at the beginning. And something about me, I actually very rarely read the synopsis. I just walk in blindly. I might watch 3 seconds of a trailer and be like, oh, gonna watch this now. So I'm glad that I didn't read this entire novella for the synopsis of the pilot episode, because it gave way too much away, and also looks like they're talking a little bit about what's in the series too. I mean, sorry, two peas stuck in a pod come along as they run, jump and adventure, making friends and making memories. That is so funny. That is humorous. You can't tell me that's not hilarious. Also 3 exclamation points, talk about overkill. But back to the pilot episode as a whole. Now, I will say firstly that the writing was really well constructed. I feel like you could hear who John and Jane were on the page. If you were reading the script and took away the names John and Jane, I feel like you'd quite easily be able to pick who was who. So I think they did a really good job of distilling the individual voices of these 2 main characters. In terms of the pace, it was a slow burn, but it works really well. You really do feel like you are on a first date. It almost felt like, oh, what's that movie with Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy? Oh, the Before trilogy. Let's go with that. It kind of reminded me of the Before trilogy, as they're sort of looping through the city and getting to know each other, and it's all sort of building towards an event. So the slow pace of the pilot episode worked well for what it was trying to achieve, I think. The setting itself was non-existent. I had no clue that they were in New York until they said so, but I will say that I loved their house. It was a bit of me, and I can't wait to see more of it. The serial arc is relatively non-existent. I mean, they did do a teaser at the end of the episode, but I didn't watch it. That's cheating. Prime Video, that's cheating. But I will say that I suspect that the initial John and Jane's may come into this, and that is the John and Jane from the very beginning of the episode. The agency and their objectives might feature into the series as a whole. Maybe John or Jane, but likely John, will get too nosy and come too close to some sort of truth. And then maybe there'll be an aspect of them two, John and Jane, having to test the strength of their relationship. And, is it just the job, or are they actually in this together? Perhaps that's what we will discover if we chose to watch the entire series. In terms of an end of episode hook, there wasn't really one. I mean, John and Jane go to bed, and we get the sense that in the morning they'll wake up and have to do this or some aspect of this day all over again. And that's what their life is going to be. And so as the proverbial lights go off, you have to ask yourself, do I want to join them? And that is a good segue into asking the only question that matters on the pilot principle. Will I be continuing with Mr. and Mrs. Smith? Pause for dramatic effect. Yes, I will be turning on the proverbial lights in the morning and I will be joining them on the rest of their missions. Why? Well, because I really enjoy character-driven programs, and I'm getting the sense from this series that it is very much about these two people, and I am interested in seeing where their journey is going to go. It's also got the quiet intrigue of espionage behind it, but it feels secondary to the primary focus, which are the two characters and how their dynamics are going to play off of each other and grow throughout the course of the series. Also, which is really weird, but I liked that it wasn't forced on me. I liked that I got to the end of the episode and they weren't like, well, you better be watching episode 2. Here's a massive hook for you to fall on, idiot. It felt like it was my choice. Maybe I've been bamboozled. Maybe I've been tricked. Maybe Mr. and Mrs. Smith were playing too hard to get, and that is exactly what worked on me as an audience member. But yeah, I liked that they put their cards out on the table and they said, pick them up, don't pick them up, it's up to you. We're going for cake. Weird analogy, but ultimately that is just me. So if you prefer a more stereotypical spy thriller with a mustache twirling megalomaniacs, then Mr. and Mrs. Smith may not be for you. If you prefer a richer environment to your dramas, a host of characters, locations, and thrilling clock-ticking tasks, and not just two people walking around a city, then you might find the pilot episode of Mr. and Mrs. Smith relatively dull. And finally, if you prefer a little more context to your shows on episode 1 and not have to work so hard or just be shoved in blind, then again, you might not want to be wedded to this series. And of course, all of these might unfold in subsequent episodes, but I'm only here to judge the pilot, people. And my last judgment is to give First Date, the pilot episode of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, a pilot score, and for which I will be giving it a 5. A 5 out of 5. My first 5. Maybe it's because it's the 30th episode and I was feeling generous. But as I'm not actually that emotionally inclined, I will say that the reason that I'm giving it the full 5 stars is because I thought we had really smooth character introductions. We watched as the characters followed a simple task that escalated, and I think there was a nice change in the characters at the end from where we met them at the start, and a niggling sense of where things will be going from there. Also, it was a bit of a different take and a refreshing take on the spy thriller genre, I think. But maybe that's just me comparing it with the craziness that was Matthew Vaughn's Argylle. Now that we've hashed out the fundamental principles, will you be giving the pilot episode a watch? Or have you already binged every episode of Mr. and Mrs. Smith? Follow and chat to me over on Threads, Instagram and Twitter/X at Pilot Principle, where you can also leave a suggestion of what pilot review you would like for me to do next. If I don't see you over there, then I will catch you here on the next episode. Aww.